So, what are the core and the periphery? You already came across those concepts and you learned about those concepts in the text. Flint and Taylor discuss it. But basically, and also mentioned by Flint and Taylor, core are processes. These are not so much areas, although they are concentrated in specific areas, but they are not based on those areas, but they are based on economic activities which are based on high wages, advanced technology, and are based on a diversified production. While on the other hand, I already discussed, we talked about the periphery in the Baltic. These areas are characterized by low wages, or no wages, a relatively simple technology, and the production of a few products. And over time, this has changed. Here, the bottom half here, you have the core production in the early 20th century. Car production was then clearly a core activity. And at that time, in the periphery, it was more about agricultural production, plantation forms, very limited range of agricultural production is very highly specialized. This has changed over time, and now it's more about high-tech services, let's call it like that, in the core, while on the other hand, industrial production has more or less moved from the core to the periphery. And although the car industry is not so much peripheralized yet, it's happening. And a lot of other production, like for instance textiles, which were in the early 19th century very much characteristics of what's happening in core economies, that has become very much characteristics of peripheral economies. So there are core processes and peripheral processes. That's what Flint and Taylor, look with me, they very importantly stress. And then that maps on, you can map them where those processes are, then they become dominant in a specific area, and they become dominant for specific states. So they have core processes, peripheral processes, but you have also core states and peripheral states. These are areas where those processes on the one hand cluster, on the other hand they are, which I already mentioned in the emergence of the capitalist world economy in the long 16th century, they are instrumental in forcing those differences. Strong core states help strong core producers. We'll come back to the point also later. So it's important that core and periphery, that the goods are not the types of goods which are exchanged in those between the core and periphery. These change over time. In the beginning, it was more about agricultural commodities. Later, it was industrial products, and now it's more high-tech services. How does this work? Well, an important concept in this regard, which Wallerstein uses, is the idea of households. Core and periphery. Why are the wages lower? Well, that has to do with different form of household structures. Households, that's more than just a family. It's more. It can be one or two persons household in the core, but it can be a more extended family in the periphery. The basic idea is that it's a household is over a longer period of time, it pools its resources, pools its income. And then the concept is another confusing concept: the semi-proletarian households in the periphery. These are households, mostly relatively extended families, where some members have wage laborers, while a lot of other family members, think about, for instance, the subsistence farming wife, supplies also food, also income for the household. But that can also be migration. You can argue that the Chinese migrants from the Chinese periphery to the coastal areas, that these are semi-proletarian households in the sense that that their pay is so low because they are raised in a different area where you have a lot of subsistence farming. So what's happening in these households? You could also at the lower scale, it is the worker space can be minimized, but also it empowers the people who mostly men who get waged laborers internally in that household. Another point this bullet makes, the last bullet point makes, is that over time it changes. In the core, there were also a lot of semi-proletarian households, but over time, those households have become proletarized in the sense that all their income. So it's on one hand based on the political struggle of the workers who strike and get better wage conditions. On the other hand, the economy develops and requires better skills, which means that those workers are becoming in a better bargaining position. Already showed you this graph, sorry for the reproduction. So over time, those differences between north and south, let's say between core and peripheral, in the sense of relatively wage levels, has increased over time. And 2 centuries ago, it was hardly different, but that has really exploded. Well, how does space come into the equation? Well, first of all, there are spatial differences, core areas and peripheral areas where those activities concentrate, has to do with power, with difference in states, but that's also to do with the division of the workforce in the world. And initially, that was basically done through travel costs. It was too expensive for a normal worker in the periphery to travel to the core to get higher wages. And also initially those differences were not that big, so why would you do it? It's hardly profitable. But over time those differences increased, and then it became more of a the state became more the instrument to through the development of a territorial state to limit that form of migration, or at least to control it. And that states were able to do that. That had to do. We'll come back to the state formation later on in this course, because as also mentioned by Flint and Taylor, the development of states, they hindered the idea of that there was one group of people who suffered from the capitalist world economy. It hindered the development of class consciousness, and instead it helped the development of ethnic and racially based consciousness. And those differences emerged over time, and now they're more directly policed through border controls. The migration crisis in Europe has. You can look at it from this perspective. Later on, when you talk about imperialism, that this nice graph, this figure of Galtung, where he also makes the distinction between core and periphery and different types of classes. A large A class, dominant class, who profits from the system, but also a class who profits from the system in the periphery. And these two classes, on the one hand, they collaborate. The core profits from the trade with the periphery, and on the other hand, the core delivers the military goods, for instance, for the elite in the periphery to repress its dominated class, to repress the large part of the population. So here, dominance in the periphery is then based on repression, while dominance of the dominant class in the core is based on social imperialism. So not so much on direct repression, but by the development of the welfare state especially. So why not only a core and a periphery? Why is it also semi-periphery? Doesn't it really fit? Are there areas where there's a mixture of it? It's a kind of confused distinction. Well, some argue that's the case, but Emmanuel Wallerstein he gives a really strong position towards the semi-periphery. It has an important position because it stabilizes. It's a structural argument. It stabilizes the world system through depolarization. You have just a core and periphery. Well, that's so unequal that it would generate a lot of conflict. So you can better when the periphery also has a part of it which is already a bit more like the core, or has the hope to become like the core. Well, they won't object too much to the system because they also profit from the system. You can also call that on the one hand the divide and rule. On the other hand, that's linked to the stabilization through development. That's if you are a peripheral state living in power in a peripheral state, you can work your state machinery to become more powerful in the capitalist world economy, so that you become more like a core state. So and then through the states of the semi-periphery, where you're very much actively involved in the economy, you can develop, and that also creates a lot of stability in the system. So this figure also shows this, that's the core and the periphery, the semi-periphery in between, which is a mixture of relations with the core and the periphery. So the core, the semi-periphery is the periphery to the core, but the semi-periphery is like a core to a large part of the periphery. So to summarize, so you have the semi-peripheral development potential. It's not so hopeless as in most of the periphery. There is some state power in the semi-peripheral states, and in the core there are a lot of institutional fixes, a lot of path dependency, a lot of problems which hinder further development. And the semi-periphery, the more or less maximizes the need and possibility for development, and especially the states. Come back to that specific topic of the role of the state later on. Is very important in the semi-periphery. You have core processes and peripheral processes, but semi-peripheral process you don't have. The semi-periphery is fixed. That concept is fixed to a state. But on the other hand, it's also very much conflict-ridden. It generates a lot of tensions. This graph tries to explain a little bit more. The possibility for development is very low. To profit from the world system is very low in the periphery, while the necessity for development is very, very high in the periphery, very low in the core. And the level of activity, of intervention, of skewing the system through the state is very low in the periphery because of the lack of possibility. And in the core is also relatively low because of the lack of necessity. Well, in the semi-periphery, there's an optimum between necessity and possibility. So the activity by intervening in the processes in the world's economy is the largest. And you could also link that to the terrorist activity in the world. Flint and Taylor, page 96, they discuss that. There you see that the semi-periphery is also the part of the world system where the most terrorist activities take place.